Hi, I want to talk to you today on a very important subject. And it's so important that, in fact, without the ability to do it very well, you could be a sales maker, you could be in leadership. But if you don't learn how to master this particular skill, your potential will be greatly impacted. What am I talking about? Well, let me give you a little bit of a hint. The title of what I'm calling this particular training session is called Stop Talking and Start Selling. I know what you're thinking. How can you possibly sell anybody something or get them excited about following you if you're in leadership if you're not talking? I know it sounds a little bit counterintuitive, but I can promise you that people spend a lot more time caring about what they think and the people that let them articulate that to them versus hearing what other people think and other people tell them how important they are. So let me give you an example. My wife, I tell this story in the first chapter of Persuade called The Law of Connection, where I asked her one time, I said, honey, how do you connect with people? Because she's what I would call a people magnet. Everybody who meets Kate just loves her. How do you connect with people? And I wanted to just kind of discover what her perception of that was, because I know how she connects with people. I always think it's because of how she listens. My wife listens to you in a way where you can literally feel her listening to you. We call that empathy, right? That's what makes her a little bit of a people magnet. But I wanted to know what she thought her superpower was and why she was such a great connector. And it was very interesting what she said. When I said, Kate, why are you such a great connector? She didn't even answer my question. She actually ignored it. And instead, she turned the tables around and she started asking me about me. She started asking me questions about why I thought I was a good connector. Before I knew it, she had taken control of the conversation. And as we talked, I realized, oh my gosh, the reason she didn't tell me what makes her a great connector is because she was demonstrating it for me. She was asking about me, and as she asked about me, I felt enlarged on the inside. I felt encouraged. I felt elevated. And that's one of the things great sales makers do. And I want to share a quick principle with you here. And the principle is simply this. When people want to impress you, they'll talk to you about themselves. But when they want to impact you, they'll ask about you. Haven't you discovered that to be true? One of the things that a sign I put out on my desk from time to time, maybe you can see it, it's called Stop Talking. This kind of gives me a cue to do one of two things. The first is you might think that it means simply just to listen, but stop talking to me also means start asking the right kind of questions. Again, it's very counterintuitive because when you think of the profession of sales, or when you think of a really strong executive as a leader, you think of somebody who's always saying the right thing at the right time. But I promise you, one of the greatest skills of the most influential people you'll ever meet, it's their ability to ask great questions and then listen. They learn to listen with their body language. They learn to use the pause. Did you know you can communicate with people with silence? So for example, if I were to ask you a question and then at the end of the sentence just pause, like this, you would know it's your turn to talk. If we're in the middle of a conversation and I say something and you say something back and I go like this and I flinch and I go, you know it's your turn to talk again. So there's ways that we can ask questions with our body language, but there's also ways that we want to ask questions using our words, using our heart as well. Because the purpose of a question when you're meeting with somebody, and whether you're in the counseling business and trying to get to the heart of a matter, or you're sitting with a client and you're trying to figure out what they really want, or you're a leader trying to connect with one of your people, there's a lot of powers inherent within questions that you can tap into when you learn to get really good at asking questions. For example, one of the reasons for questions, again, isn't to simply elicit information, it's to connect with people. I've got an entire chapter called The Law of Discovery within my best-selling book, Persuade. Guess what it's about? The entire chapter is about questions. But I intentionally started that chapter off talking about something incredibly important. To give you an idea how passionate I am about questions, I talk about 12 powers that are inherent within questions and how powerful a good question is in the hands of a sales maker. Let me just share with you a couple of those powers. One of the powers inherent within a question, when you know how to use a question the right way, is it creates connection with people. It can literally draw people towards you, because when you ask people questions, it has the emotional impact help draw them towards you, versus when you're talking or telling, it has the emotional impact sometimes of pushing them away. That's why I say stop talking and start selling. Have you noticed, by the way, that when you were new in sales or new in leadership or new in whatever it is you're doing for a living, you've kind of got your learner hat on, you've got a heart of curiosity, and what are you doing all the time? You're asking questions. And as you ask questions, you're learning. But something happens as we start to get experience and gain confidence. And as time goes on, we start talking more because we know what we're doing. And we stop asking questions as much as we should. Some of the most important questions that you'll ask, it's not because you need the answer, it's to create the conversation. It's to find out what's happening under the surface. So the question isn't necessarily always for you. The question creates an atmosphere within a dialogue between two people. It creates an emotional atmosphere that's designed to pull people towards you. If they're upset, you can literally calm somebody down with a question. Somebody had asked me once, I was at one of those groups where I was speaking and we did a table talk afterwards. They said, Scott, what do you do if a client's really angry? And I thought to myself, well, that's a really good question. And the answer to that is, if somebody's at a 10 octave and they're just emotionally out of control, anything you say to them, they're going to want to do what? Push on you and fight. But if you stop and ask them a question, why do you feel that way? I'm so sorry what you're going through. What would you like to see happen? What does that do? It draws them to you, because one of the things the mind can't resist a question. So anytime you ask a good question, it captivates the audience's attention. It captivates a client's attention. It can captivate an employee's attention if it's placed and said at the right time and in the right way. Because as soon as you hurl a question at somebody, what's the first thing they do? It's like throwing a ball. They're going to catch it like in baseball. So whenever you're asking a question, imagine you're tossing a ball to somebody and they're going to catch it. And as they catch it, there's a few things you want to be aware of. One of those things is you want to be aware of how that question creates impact. Let me give you an example. Some questions you ask people, they're just going to give you an answer and you're going to know there's no emotional impact and everybody just moves on. But there's other questions where they're going to respond with body language where you just know they made an impact. For example, you're going to go, or you're going to see them go like this. You might even see them look up. They might even say to you, that's a great question. I'm going to have to think about that. So another power inherent within questions is the ability to create emotional impact and then be able to read the customer, to be able to read the employee, to see what's impacting them, because you'll know where to probe deeper in versus where to move on to the next subject in your conversation. I like to think of a question as like an ice cream scoop. It has the ability to kind of go into what's frozen or go into the bottom of something or what's hidden, and it unearths, it's like a spoon, it unearths what's hidden, and that's where it helps you to dig up the greatness within somebody, help them to feel and think thoughts that maybe they haven't before. Questions have the ability to challenge assumptions. Questions have the ability to get people to open up their minds in different ways. Let me give you a quick example. Let's say you're talking to somebody today about the stock market and they say, oh gosh, I just know it's going to be falling soon. You might reply with, you know, that could absolutely be true. But for all the times that we thought it was going to fall and it went up, is it possible that it's going to keep climbing over the next couple of months too? Is it possible? See, I've just changed that person's assumption. I've challenged what their current belief was. And all I wanted to do was to get away from the cemented belief that they think the market's going to go down. So the power of a question can set and direct a conversation. It can challenge an assumption. It can unearth that which is hidden, but also it can do a lot of other things as well. There's 5 particular questions I want to talk to you about. I call these guys the 5 W brothers. They helped me early in my career when I didn't know what to say when I was new. It reminded me of what to ask, and I would always lean on them. You've probably heard of them before. The first member of the 5 W brothers is the what, the who, the when, the where, and the why. You've heard them before. So let me challenge you that when you're having a conversation with somebody, spend half your time talking and twice as much time listening. But in order to do that, you've got to be able to ask great questions. Ask the who, the what, the when, the where, and the why question. Now, let me camp out on the why question for a minute. The why is the passion. The why is the motivation of why somebody's doing something. This is very important for a sales maker, because when you discover a customer's true why, you'll also discover the way to the close. In fact, one of the greatest ways to close a client in their business is by asking the right questions, because if you ask enough of the right questions, you never have to close them. The customer actually closes themselves. See, this is one of the misnomers about sales too, is that people think salespeople, great salespeople, are pushy. And if you've experienced that before, let me just say on behalf of the sales profession, I'm very sorry. It's really not supposed to be that way. Because great salespeople, they spend their time asking questions to figure out what people need and then basically just show them how to get it. Come to think of it, that's what leaders do within an organization as well. Let me rewind the tape to the beginning of this video and remind you what the title of the video again is. It's Stop Talking and Start Selling. And again, how do you sell? You sell by asking questions. A close by definition is simply a question, but it's specifically crafted by a sales maker or by a leader to take somebody or move them in a specific direction. So let me close this video by leading you in a certain direction and asking you this question right now. Is there any area of your life, both professionally or personally, financially, whether it be vocationally or whatever area it might be, that you're not quite happy with right now? Are you struggling in a certain area? I can promise you this, the answer to get from where you're at to where you want to be is always going to start with a question. What are the right questions you need to be asking yourself? You know, in my industry, there's something called the sales slump. It's where things were once good and you sold a lot, and there's now a season in your sales career where you're not selling much at all. Here's what I've discovered about sales slumps. A lot of times performance lags simply because what got you successful, the things that you did that led to your current success, you've stopped doing. So let me ask you this, and here's my question for you. Is there anything that you used to do that made you happy, that made you successful, that you're no longer doing? Maybe it was a discipline or a habit. Maybe it was just a practice. Maybe it was a relationship that you once had that you no longer had. Maybe it's a new friend that you need to find. What did you do in the past that made you happy or successful that you're no longer doing today? And what could you be doing today that would lead to happiness, that would lead to success? Let me leave you with that question, and one very important question also, which is simply this. How did you get to where you're at today? What were the steps that brought you to this place? If you had to give advice to somebody else, what advice would you give to follow in your footsteps? Do you believe what got you here will get you to where you want to go? When you look off into the future and see where you want to go, what are the steps you think you need to take there? If you've got a customer who's stuck in the mud with you and you can't move them, what are the questions that you can ask that would kind of unstick them and kind of get them moving along? What are the questions you want to be asking yourself in this season of life? Because here's what I can promise you. If you're stuck, get a question out, discover what the right question is, dig it up so you can kind of unearth and get yourself unstuck and get moving in the right direction. You know, one of the ways I've always referred to myself is as a Socratic. I'm a Socratic thinker. In the Law of Discovery, I talk about Socrates and what he did. He was an ancient man of wisdom and great philosophy who lived in Greece. What made him so wise is he would sit in the city hall, he would sit in the town square area, and students would come to him and he would pose questions that would start great discussions. And whenever the questions would start to die down, he would start to ask other questions, because questions kind of fuel the energy, they create the emotion in the atmosphere. So I've always thought of myself as a Socratic because my brain thinks in questions. If I'm having pain, the first thing I think to myself is, why am I feeling this way? How did this happen? What can I do to correct it? So I've trained my brain from the time I was young to ask questions, but I didn't instinctively just become a great question asker overnight. I learned to become a master asker for a couple of reasons. One, I was too young, I didn't know what to say, so I learned what to ask. But then also two, I realized the impact I can have in creating relationships and closing business by learning great questions to ask. And then eventually I learned that the questions I asked shouldn't just be directed at other people, but sometimes asked of myself. I'll close with this last story. I had a meeting with a client a number of years ago at a restaurant called Zippy's, and they never showed up. Well, I usually work through lunch, but I thought, well, I'm here, I might as well eat. And I was wrestling with some stuff in my life at the time, and I thought to myself, I'm going to pray during lunch. I was just kind of sitting there by myself, and I had a notepad and I had a pen, and I decided I'm going to write some questions down for God, because I'm a Socratic. Maybe he thinks in questions too. I don't know. I've never done this before. So I started writing some questions out for God about a few different areas of my life. And as I did, before I would even finish some of the questions, I felt like I had got this whisper inside of my heart, like he had answered some of them. Well, some of them where I was like, whoa, oh, okay. And other ones, and then there was this one, he gave me an answer. I felt like God had whispered in my heart. I thought, I don't like that questions, and I stopped writing questions down. So let me just leave you with this. What are the questions you need to start asking yourself? What are the questions you need to start asking your customers? What questions should you ask your kids, your spouse, those who are following you and those who influence you? What questions should you start asking God during prayer time if you're a person of faith? So much of the secret of life starts with being able to ask a question, because a question draws the humility out of you to say that I don't know, but I know somebody else does. So next time you're not sure what to say, or next time you're not getting the result that you want in your life, in any area of your life, think about the right question to ask. And remember my little sign I keep on my desk. And by the way, the sign always faces me because it's not for other people. It's to remind me that sometimes I need to stop talking and start listening, but other times I need to stop talking and start selling. And how do you sell? By asking great questions. Thank you very much.